I didn't expect my life to tilt sideways on a quiet Tuesday morning, but it did so suddenly that I still feel the echo of it in my chest. I only went back home because I'd forgotten a folder, a simple blue one with our original investment statements. But what I found waiting inside the walls of my own home felt like someone slowly pulling the floor out from under me. And the part that stings the most is this: they didn't even sound hesitant. They sounded comfortable plotting it. I parked in our driveway the way I always do, leaving room for Henry's old Ford in case he came back early from the hardware store. The maple tree by the porch rustled in the soft Madison breeze, and for a moment, everything felt steady, familiar, safe. I remember thinking I'd make us coffee before we left for the airport. Maybe stop by Pike Place Market tomorrow morning. Maybe walk along the Sound like we used to. My mind was still in that softness when I stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish, the scent I'd used the night before. I walked toward the study, thinking only of that blue folder when I stopped cold. Voices traveled down the hallway, low, deliberate, unmistakably serious. "We need to show a pattern of decline," said a man. A smooth voice, confident. I recognized it immediately. Lewis Harper, Brandon's lawyer, his friend, his enabler. My son spoke next, and the sound of his voice hit me like a small, sharp punch. "It won't be hard. They've been slowing down for years. The judge won't question it." My fingers slipped from the strap of my purse. It hit the floor with a soft thud, barely audible over the rush of blood in my ears. Slowing down for years. He said it like an accusation, like a flaw, like a weakness he could monetize. Lewis cleared his throat. "We'll need examples. Forgetting appointments, confusion with bills. You should gather anything that supports cognitive decline. Photos, messages, and be careful. Don't make it obvious." I pressed my hand against the cool wall, steadying myself. Then Brandon laughed. My son, my only child. A laugh I once waited for at his school recital. A laugh that once made me proud. "Trust me," he said. "They won't even see it coming." My heart folded in on itself, slow and tight, like a paper cup crushed in someone's hand. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Their words drifted through the hallway like poison. Lewis continued, businesslike. "Once the guardianship is granted, you'll have full control. The house, the accounts, the investment portfolio, all of it. But you need to make sure they don't do anything unexpected between now and the filing. The house, our house, the one Henry and I built room by room with our own hands over 40 years. The investment portfolio we'd grown slowly, carefully, deliberately, like tending a garden." My throat tightened. I felt insulted, betrayed, embarrassed all at once. Each sentence they spoke was another crack forming across the trust one had carried for him all his life. Brandon sighed dramatically. "They're too stubborn to admit anything's wrong. They'll fight it if they see papers. So we eased them into it. Eased them like we were children, like we were confused, like we were temporary obstacles." He didn't sound conflicted. He didn't sound like someone wrestling with guilt. And that, more than anything else, is what hurt. Not just the betrayal, but the ease with which he planned it. The study door creaked only slightly, but enough to snap me out of my trance. I stepped backward slowly, silently, feeling every inch of the hardwood floor beneath my shoes. I couldn't face them. Not then, not with my pulse shredding through me. I left the house without looking back. The air outside felt too bright, too clean compared to the heaviness inside me. I got in the car, turned the key, and drove. Not home. Not anywhere I had planned. I just drove until I reached Cedar Bean, the little cafe Henry and I used to visit on Saturday mornings. Inside, the warmth of the place wrapped around me like a memory. Students typed on laptops. A barista laughed while steaming milk. Everything looked normal, painfully normal, in a way that made my hands tremble as I held my coffee. I sat at a corner table, the one with the window overlooking Monroe Street. Cars passed, people walked by, and I sat there listening to the soft clatter of cups, trying to swallow the tight burning that kept rising in my throat. I replayed their words over and over. Decline, guardianship, control. Each one scraped across me like sandpaper. Had Brandon always seen us this way? Had he been waiting for us to get older, waiting for an excuse, waiting for an opportunity? Little memories surfaced, ones I'd brushed off before. His comments about selling the house someday. His casual jokes about how exhausting it must be to keep track of investments at our age. The time he suggested he handle our bills for convenience. They all clicked together now in a way that felt sickeningly clear. I realized something in that cafe, surrounded by the hum of people living ordinary, unbroken moments. My own son didn't see us as parents anymore. He saw us as assets. Assets he believed were ready to harvest. My chest tightened not with panic, but with something quieter, heavier. Resentment from every word he'd said. Every phrase he'd used so casually. Every piece of me he had dismissed, underestimated, or decided to erase. By the time I left Cedar Bean, the sun had dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the street. And in those shadows, a decision settled in me. Not loud, not angry, but solid. I wasn't going to crumble. I wasn't going to warn him. And I wasn't going to let him take a single inch more than he already had. Whatever came next, Henry and I would face it together, quietly, carefully, and Brandon would never see that coming. When I walked through our front door later that afternoon, I felt heavier than when I'd left. As if someone had quietly placed a weight on my chest that I couldn't lift off. The house looked the same, but I didn't. Something in me had shifted the moment I heard my own son talk about us, like a pair of worn-out appliances he was planning to replace. The resentment was still warm under my ribs, steady and sharp. Henry was in the kitchen, humming softly while rinsing a pot. He turned when he heard me, and the smile he gave me, simple, trusting, familiar, almost broke me. I stood there a second too long, trying to decide whether to tell him everything at once or ease him into it. But there was no gentle way to explain the kind of betrayal I had just heard. "We need to talk," I said quietly. He put the pot down. "What happened?" I didn't sit. I couldn't. I told him exactly what I had heard in the study, word for word, watching each sentence land on him like a quiet blow. When I repeated the part about us being easy to ease into it, Henry closed his eyes and pressed his fingers against the bridge of his nose. "I knew he was getting pushy," he said softly. "But this is different." His voice cracked just a little, and my resentment flared again, not toward him, but toward the ease with which Brandon had spoken earlier, the confidence in his tone. He had sounded so sure we would fall right into the role he wrote for us. Weak, slow, helpless. He talked about us like we weren't even people. I whispered. Like we're obstacles, like we're work. Henry walked toward me and rested a hand on my shoulder. It steadied me, but it couldn't quiet the storm going on inside. Every phrase Brandon had used replayed in my mind. Decline, control, guardianship, words meant to erase who we were. "He's been trying to get into our accounts for months," Henry said after a long pause. "Asking about passwords, pushing to take over bill payments. I thought he just wanted to help." He looked down. I didn't want to assume the worst. Hearing that made my resentment burn even brighter. Brandon hadn't just been planning today. He had been chipping away slowly, testing limits, watching for any sign that we might bend. Every so-called helpful offer he'd made now felt like a setup. Every comment about how lucky we were to have him nearby sounded different now, less like support, more like strategy. I sat down finally, my hands trembling. "We have to be smart, careful. We can't let him know we know." Henry nodded, his jaw tightening in a way that told me he was fighting his own anger. "We won't," he said, "but we'll protect ourselves." We spent hours talking through everything piece by piece. Henry pulled out every account statement, tax record, email chain, anything Brandon had touched or asked about recently. Every time Henry discovered something small Brandon had tried to adjust, he let out a long breath and shook his head. And every time he did, that old sting in my chest returned. Not just betrayal, disappointment, the kind only a parent understands. I organized our family documents with the same precision I once used in my years working in archives. Marriage certificates, mortgage papers, insurance forms, old tax returns, everything we could possibly need. The resentment kept me focused, pushing me forward as I arranged each paper. Every time I touched a folder Brandon once asked about, I felt that sharp reminder. He hadn't wanted to help us. He had been studying us like a problem to solve. Later in the evening we went to the library, the one off Monroe Street that always smelled faintly of old pages and lemon cleaner. The archive room was quiet, familiar. I made copies of important documents, labeling each folder carefully while Henry scanned digital backups. He worked slowly, checking every detail twice the way he used to when he designed blueprints. "This is our defense," he said quietly. "Not just legal, personal. He won't get the chance to rewrite who we are." Hearing him say that steadied something in me because that was what Brandon had been doing, rewriting us, turning us into a story that made his actions seem reasonable. But we were going to write our own. When we got home, the house felt different. Not safer, not yet, but stronger somehow, as if our planning had built invisible walls between us and Brandon's intentions. We moved through the room silently, both tired but alert. As I turned off the lamp in the living room, the resentment drifted back again, but this time it settled differently. Not just as pain but as purpose. Every word Brandon had spoken, every careless dismissal, every assumption would become fuel. We were not weak. We were not confused. And we were not done. Henry came to stand beside me. "We'll handle this," he said softly. "Together." And for the first time since the moment I stood frozen in our hallway, I believed it. The first morning I decided to pretend. The air outside was cool and still, the kind of quiet Wisconsin dawn that usually settled my nerves. But not that day. My mind was sharp, focused, and burning with the kind of resentment I had never felt before. Not loud resentment but quiet, controlled, steady, the kind that stays just beneath the surface and keeps you moving. Brandon had spoken about us like a project he needed to finish. So now we were going to show him just how wrong he was. It began with something simple. I forgot the date for the neighborhood trash pickup. Brandon noticed when he came by that afternoon, strolling in like someone checking on a tenant. He leaned against the porch railing and shook his head with that tone he always used when he wanted to sound patient. "Mom, you used to keep track of everything," he said. "This isn't like you." My resentment surged, hot and immediate, but I kept my voice soft. "I guess I must have mixed things up." He nodded slowly, like he was confirming something he already believed. I wanted to ask him when he decided to rewrite our entire history, when he stopped seeing us as the same people who raised him. But I stayed quiet. Quiet would give us what we needed. Henry played his part too. That afternoon, he left some mail scattered on the kitchen table, letters he had already read and organized the night before. When Brandon walked in and saw the envelopes, he sighed loudly as if the mess personally insulted him. "You really should let me help you both," he said, "before this gets worse." I looked down, pretending embarrassment. But inside, every word he said felt like another thread snapping in the fabric that held us together. He sounded so sure of himself, so certain that we were slipping. He didn't even hesitate. Not once did he look at us and see parents, just opportunity. Later that week I took it further. I messed up a grocery list, mixing brands and writing down things we didn't need. When Brandon saw the pantry during one of his surprise drop-ins, he frowned. "You bought the wrong cereal. Dad never eats this kind." He said it so casually, as if he had been living here making breakfast for Henry every morning for his entire life, as if he knew our habits better than we did. The unfairness hit hard and unexpectedly, so sharp that I had to turn away for a moment. I remembered a day long ago when my own mother forgot a simple detail at the store. Brandon had been 12, impatient, and he'd complained loudly. I'd pulled him aside and whispered, "Be gentle. People deserve kindness." And now here he was, grown, looking at us with that same impatience, but multiplied, polished into something colder. That memory stung more than his words. The twist came a few days later when I overheard him talking to someone on the phone outside on the porch. I wasn't trying to listen. I was bringing out a bag of recyclables, moving slowly like an older woman struggling with a task. I hadn't meant to catch the conversation, but his voice carried. "They won't fight it," he said. "They're declining faster than I expected. It's almost too easy." Too easy. That phrase dug into me deeper than anything else. I set the bag down and stood there for a moment, unable to move. My own son, the child I stayed up with during thunderstorms, the boy I helped through school projects he procrastinated on, the teenager I drove to his first job interview, had just described us as too easy. I almost went inside and dropped the entire plan. Not to give up, but to confront him, to tell him exactly what I thought of this version of him, the one who treated us like a prize he deserved. But then I realized something. If I reacted, he would shift gears. He would rethink. He would adjust. Silence was our advantage. So I exhaled slowly, picked the bag up again and walked back inside. Henry was at the kitchen table, taking apart one of his old radios. Hands steady, eyes focused. No sign of decline anywhere. I sat across from him and whispered. He said, It's too easy. Henry didn't look up. He only said, "Good." And then he reached under the table and slid a small device toward me, a microphone he had wired himself. He had already placed the first one behind the bookshelf earlier that morning. That moment brought me back to the early days of our marriage when we used to take long winter drives near Lake Mendota, just to talk about life, goals, fears. Henry told me once, "If anyone ever underestimates you, that's your greatest advantage." I'd always thought he meant it metaphorically. Now he meant it quite literally. We spent the next few days planting the rest of the microphones. One in the kitchen vent, one under the porch bench, one near the hallway where Brandon liked to hold his dramatic, sigh-filled conversations. We recorded everything. Every comment, every plan, every careless admission. And each time we captured another piece of his scheme, the resentment in me sharpened but also shifted. It no longer felt wild or painful. It became direction, clarity, a reminder of why we had to stay in control. Brandon kept visiting, growing bolder with every fake mistake we made. He talked openly about assisted living, about legal filings, about the timeline he had created for our future. Each sentence he spoke landed heavier than the last, but we never broke character. I pretended to forget what day it was. Henry pretended to lose track of where he left his glasses, and Brandon believed every bit of it. Every act, every small staged slip. He didn't know he was walking into a trap we built with calm hands and steady minds. Snow fell outside one evening as we saved the latest recording. The quiet, white-covered night made the whole house feel cleaner, somehow clearer. Henry looked at me and said, "He thinks we're fading." I nodded. "But we're not." "No," he said softly. "We're preparing." And as the snow continued falling outside our window, I realized something that steadied me completely. The only weakness in the house belonged to the one who thought we had any. The day we decided to move forward felt strangely calm. Not peaceful, just calm in the way a person feels after understanding exactly what they're up against. I woke up knowing what needed to be done, and knowing that Brandon would never expect us to take control so quietly and so completely. The recordings were organized, the documents ready, and every word he had spoken still echoed in my mind, each one feeding a steady resentment I could no longer ignore. I contacted Emily Carson that morning. She had been my colleague years ago, back when organizing archives was part of my everyday life. Emily had grown into a sharp, steady attorney with a reputation for being thorough but fair. When she answered the phone and heard the tension in my voice, she insisted we come to her office right away. When Henry and I sat across from her, the first thing she asked was simple. "Tell me everything." So we did. Every comment Brandon made about decline, every plan he hinted at, every moment he looked at us like we were becoming someone else, someone smaller. As I spoke, I watched Emily's expression tighten. When Henry played one of the recordings, her eyebrows lifted and she let out a slow breath. "This isn't misunderstanding," she said softly. "This is strategy, and not a good one." Hearing her say it out loud with that calm certainty only an attorney can give made the resentment in me settle even deeper. Not a sting, but a weight I would carry until this was done. Because Brandon had made this choice. He had stepped over a line that should never be crossed between parents and children. Emily began working immediately. She laid out a plan that was clean, legal, and protective. We would get full cognitive evaluations, first thorough tests from reputable doctors in Madison. She said, "If Brandon is building a case, we need to build something stronger." I didn't mind being examined. Not after everything he'd said. Not after hearing him talk about us like a pair of fading light bulbs. The tests didn't frighten me. They empowered me. They reminded me that my mind was still mine, sharp and working exactly the way it needed to. When the doctor handed us our results, both declaring full cognitive ability, something inside me steadied. Brandon's words rang in my head again. "They're declining faster than I expected." And I felt my resentment twist tighter. Not rage, not bitterness, just a quiet sense of justice forming. Emily took the evaluations, the recordings, and the documents we'd prepared. She changed our old paperwork, revoked Brandon's power of attorney, rewrote our legal protections, and ensured no one but us had access to our finances. Her confidence was comforting. Every time she clicked her pen or stapled a packet, I felt another layer of Brandon's control slip away. When all the paperwork was ready, she asked us one question. "Do you want me to deliver this directly to his attorney?" I hesitated, not because I doubted the decision but because of how far we had come. Brandon had always assumed we would stay in the role he gave us. Quiet, trusting, unaware, and now we were making moves he would never recover from. Yes, I said. Let him see exactly what he tried to take. Emily arrived at Lewis Harper's law office on a cloudy afternoon. She took our full evidence packet with her. Doctor's reports, new power of attorney documents, recordings, transcripts, everything. Later, she told us the meeting lasted only minutes. Lewis listened, turned pale, then excused himself. When he came back, he said he would no longer be representing Brandon. He handed her a folder before she left. Internal drafts, notes Brandon had prepared, even strategies they were planning to use against us. Hearing that made my chest tighten again. Not with surprise anymore, but with something heavier. Every detail in those drafts was another reminder of how deeply Brandon misunderstood us. Every comment he'd made about taking over before things got messy felt more insulting now than it had the first time I heard it. When Emily handed us that folder at our dining table later that evening, I flipped through the papers slowly. My resentment was no longer sharp. It was steady, grounded in reality. He had planned to cut us out of our own lives. He believed we wouldn't notice. He believed we wouldn't resist. As we stored copies of everything in our safe deposit box, Henry placed his hand over mine and said, "This is the last step before the end." I nodded, feeling a calm I hadn't felt in months. Not joy, not relief, something firmer. Brandon still believed he was in control. Soon he would learn he wasn't even close. Brandon showed up on our porch without calling, without knocking, without even pretending to show respect. He walked in with the confidence of someone who still believed he was in control. Someone who expected us to smile and step aside while he rearranged our lives. The resentment I felt rose the moment I saw his face. Not raging or loud, just a steady reminder of everything he had planned behind our backs. He stood in the kitchen doorway, his hands shoved in his pockets like he was arriving for a casual visit. "We need to talk," he said, firm and impatient, the same tone he used when he wanted something. "Things can't go on like this." I looked at him and felt that familiar sting, the way he spoke down to us, the assumption that we needed him to fix something that was never broken. Henry didn't say a word. He didn't have to. We had everything ready. I motioned for him to sit, but he stayed standing, hovering, pacing, acting like a man preparing to deliver instructions. "I've been trying to help," he said. "You two need structure. Someone responsible supervising things." There it was again. Responsible. As if we hadn't been responsible our entire lives. As if raising him, supporting him, and managing everything for decades somehow didn't count anymore. His voice carried a kind of arrogance that tightened my chest. Each word reminded me of the conversations he had with Lewis, the ones we recorded, every careless detail, every plan to take over. I reached into the drawer of the side table and placed the stack of documents on the kitchen counter. Slowly, calmly. Brandon frowned, confused. "What's that?" "Proof," I said. "Of everything you tried to do." His eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Henry turned on the small recorder we kept on the counter. Brandon's own voice filled the room, confident, calculating, talking about guardianship, about how easy it would be, about how he would take control of all assets. His face drained of color. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't blink. I slid the medical evaluations toward him. "We're fully capable, certified, tested, cleared." He swallowed hard, the first sign of panic cracking his expression. "I didn't. This is out of context." I placed the new legal documents next to the medical papers. "Your previous authorizations are revoked permanently." He stepped back as if the pages had pushed him. "Mom, Dad, this is a misunderstanding." Hearing him call us that, Mom and Dad, after everything, after weeks of treating us like nothing more than a bank account and a problem to solve, created a deep twist inside me. Resentment mixed with something sadder, something heavier. It reminded me of the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. The boy who once needed comfort more than control. That boy felt gone. I pushed one final folder toward him. "Recordings, transcripts, everything you said." He looked at the stack like it was a wall he couldn't climb. "You were spying on me?" he whispered. "No," I said. "We were protecting ourselves." The silence that followed was long and cold. Brandon glanced between us, realizing every piece of leverage he thought he had was gone. The confidence he arrived with had vanished. All that remained was the truth he built himself carelessly and openly, now laid out in front of him. You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. Henry finally spoke. "We didn't want to, but you made it necessary." Brandon's breath shook. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing like someone trapped. "So that's it? You're cutting me out." "You cut yourself out," I said. My voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It simply told the truth. He looked at us one last time, searching for permission to argue, to spin, to undo the damage. But there was nothing left for him to reach for. He walked out without another word. When the door closed behind him, the house fell still. Completely still. The kind of stillness that feels like a fresh layer of snow. Clean, quiet, full of possibility. Later that week, Emily's daughter, Chloe, moved into the guest room for a while to help us digitize our old photos and papers. She filled the house with a warmth I didn't realize we'd been missing. Laughter in the hallway, questions about old memories, music playing softly while she organized boxes. One night, as I watched her scan a stack of photos from our early years, I felt something shift inside me. Not joy, but relief. A gentle kind of peace. Brandon's silence stretched on. No calls, no messages, not even a short apology. And though part of me once would have waited for one, that part is quieter now, smaller. Instead, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the house calm around me, and for the first time in a long time I felt free. Free from pretending, free from bending, free from being treated like I was fading. The night was cool, and the porch light glowed softly against the dark. I looked out into the quiet street and let the air wash over me. I wasn't broken. I wasn't weak. I was finally choosing myself. And sometimes that's the moment your whole life begins again.